Okay, can you imagine like the gut punch of finding cuts on your 13-year-old's legs and then realizing it's just, well, the tip of the iceberg for something much, much deeper?
Or that thought that trauma for a child could actually start before they're even born. It's kind of mind-bending.
Totally. Or maybe even that some everyday parenting things we think are normal, might actually be overwhelming a tiny nervous system.
Yeah, look, it's heavy stuff, no doubt about it. But these are some of the really profound, important ideas that surfaced in the material we've been digging into for this deep dive.
Absolutely. So today, we're wading into a really difficult but incredibly crucial topic, childhood trauma. And maybe more importantly, how we can actually support kids' emotional worlds, which are just so complex.
Right. And we've pulled from quite a few sources here, expert insights, some very personal stories, things that really get to the heart of these issues.
Our goal really is to unpack what was shared, understand the surprising ways trauma shows up. Sometimes it's quite silent, isn't it?
Yeah, stealthy even. And then, crucially, find some practical, actionable insights, things you can actually use to help kids navigate all this complexity.
Okay, let's dive right in then. We really have to start with that story. The one Dr. Amy Duffy shared about finding those cuts on her 13-year-old daughter. What struck me wasn't just the shock, it was the whole sequence, the daughter denying it, and then Dr. Duffy recognizing the signs that came before, the pulling away, losing interest, appetite changes.
That part is just so relatable and, yeah, heartbreaking. It really shows how easy it is, even for parents who are really tuned in, to miss how serious things are, especially when a child is actively trying to hide it.
And that story, it leads to that awful emergency room visit. And then the description of the hospital itself, the restraints, being separated from her mom, she described it like a prison.
It's such a powerful reminder that sometimes the very systems meant to help can, well, inadvertently make a child feel even less safe.
And what's really eye-opening in this material is how it expands our whole understanding of what trauma even is. It's not just the big T traumas, right? Like abuse or accidents.
Exactly. They introduce this concept of silent or stealth trauma. Think about, say, a really prolonged, stressful family situation, maybe a 5-year-long separation or divorce. All that tension, the fighting, or maybe just that heavy, silent, walking on eggshells feeling.
Right. A corrosive environment over time, not just one big bang event.
Yeah.
That 5-year example, it really paints a picture, doesn't it?
It does. And then, okay, prepare yourself for this one. The idea, pretty stunning really, that trauma can actually start in utero.
Before birth. How?
Well, external stressors the fetus can actually perceive, like really loud noises or, say, domestic conflict, but also the mother's internal state. High cortisol levels from the mother's stress are described as, get this, neurotoxic to the developing brain.
Neurotoxic, just the mother's stress hormones, before the baby even takes its first breath. That's wild.
It is. And it goes beyond just emotional or sound stress. Nutritional factors play a role too. The material even mentions this incredibly vivid image from ultrasounds, showing babies in utero who seem to be trying to physically cut off toxins coming through the placenta because it feels so aggravating to their tiny systems.
Wow. That image is...
Yeah,
unforgettable. It really drives home that overwhelm isn't just emotional. It can impact a child's physical biology right from the very, very start.
Because ultimately, kids experience overwhelm when things are just, well, too much for their level of maturity. Their brand new systems simply aren't built to handle that kind of input yet.
Okay, so when this overwhelm or trauma happens, how does it actually show up?
Right.
Physically, I mean, in the body and the brain.
So the sources explain it triggers the survival system, and that leads mainly to two kinds of responses. First, there's the high energy activation state, fight or flight. The system's all ramped up.
Or the opposite, right? The low energy shutdown state. More like freeze or even hibernation.
Precisely. And this all gets kicked off in the limbic brain, that ancient part focused on survival and emotion. It sends signals out through the whole body via the vagus nerve, affecting basically every cell and organ. It can push the body into what's called a cell danger response, or a kind of hibernation freeze.
Okay, cell danger response.
Yeah.
What does that actually do?
Think of it like the body just slamming on the brakes. Energy levels plummet because the system's trying to conserve resources for what it perceives as a danger. And crucially, the body becomes really inefficient at basic things like detoxification.
So like everyday toxins we encounter, pollutants, chemicals, and food, They just build up.
Exactly, they build up. And these built-up toxins are called nerve irritants in the source material.
Nerve irritants.
And here's where it gets tricky, that vicious cycle. These irritants then travel back up the vagus nerve to the limbic brain, basically shouting, "Danger, we're under attack" from these irritants.
Oh, wow.
So this biological feedback loop reinforces the feeling of being unsafe, even if the original threat, the initial trauma, is long gone.
So trauma isn't just a bad memory. It can actually put the body into this physiological trap, one that hinders its ability to function normally and keeps re-triggering that danger signal. That's a really powerful idea.
It totally shifts the perspective, doesn't it? And when you look through that lens, some surprisingly common things that happen to infants and young children, start to emerge as potential sources of overwhelm or trauma for their developing systems.
What sort of things are we talking about? Things parents might not even think of as traumatic.
The sources mention things like treating babies as too independent too soon after birth, kind of rushing their natural pace.
Mm-hmm.
Also, separation shortly after birth, maybe for a necessary NICU stay or even jaundice treatment under lights. These are described as potentially traumatic for an infant's nervous system.
Even a medically necessary NICU stay. From the baby's perspective, it could be traumatic separation.
From the perspective of a nervous system that's fundamentally wired for constant connection with the mother.
Yeah.
It can be perceived as a profound disconnection. The sources also bring up outward-facing baby carriers.
Really? Why?
The suggestion is they can overstimulate and overwhelm an undeveloped nervous system. Just too much input all at once before they can handle it.
And this next one, this really surprised me. Sleep training. Or asking babies to sleep alone. The source describes this as creating a major void, an almost incomprehensible disconnection for a baby who biologically feels they need that closeness for survival.
Yeah, it's framed less as teaching independence and more as triggering a deep biological fear response and being left alone when they feel inherently vulnerable.
Another really unexpected one was about tummy time, or rather the lack of it. How that impacts basic neurodevelopment, posture, even the horizontal eye movements needed for reading later on.
Mm-hmm. And the source suggests this could potentially link to later issues, things sometimes misinterpreted as, say, ADHD-like behaviors.
That's fascinating. Connecting those very early physical experiences directly to later cognitive or behavioral challenges, like if that basic physical foundation isn't properly laid down.
It can have ripple effects for years. Absolutely.
So with all these potential triggers for overwhelm, what are the specific warning signs parents should be looking out for in their kids, according to this material?
I think the core message is always trust your gut. If you sense your child is acting differently, that's your first clue. Don't ignore that feeling.
Okay.
Specifically, watch if they're not connecting with you or their friends in the way they usually do, if they seem to be pulling inwards.
Withdrawing, yeah.
Exactly. Also, pay attention to those physical complaints that seem to come and go. Stomach aches, headaches that don't have an obvious cause. The source says these aren't things to just brush off. Avoiding places they used to enjoy or maybe not wanting to hang out with friends anymore. Those are significant flags, too.
And there was a really compelling sign mentioned. Lack of eye contact.
Yes, that's presented as a potentially key indicator. It might signal difficulty with trust, or maybe not feeling safe enough to be open and vulnerable in the relationship. It could even be a sign of attachment trauma.
Okay, so this leads to a really critical point then. If these are the signs, and trauma or overwhelm is potentially the root cause, how do we understand the behaviors? You know, the defiance, the withdrawal, the meltdowns.
Well, this material makes a very strong case. The problem is never just the behavior itself. The behavior is the outward sign, the manifestation of a deeper underlying state, often that trauma response or nervous system dysregulation we were just talking about.
So take that child who's constantly moving, maybe loud, can't sit still.
Right. That behavior, which might look like an ADHD profile, is described as potentially being a superficial cover for a huge underlying trauma response. It's like the child is trying to avoid that really uncomfortable, low-energy shutdown state by constantly activating themselves, trying to stay out of the freeze.
And it can outrun that feeling of being shut down.
Precisely. And then you see the other end of the spectrum too, right? The child who's very quiet, maybe overly compliant, trying to be invisible. They might breathe really shallowly, avoid any kind of spotlight.
Which the source connects to maybe protecting themselves from unpredictable parental emotional reactions, like trying to disappear so the perceived monster doesn't show up.
It's a survival strategy, isn't it? Learned in an environment where being seen, being noticed felt unsafe, And then there are kids who might turn outwards, becoming aggressive or bullying. And this is framed as coming from a place of insecurity, driven by that idea of, because I hurt inside, I'm going to make you hurt.
Wow. It's powerful to see all these vastly different behaviors potentially stemming from the same underlying source, a nervous system just struggling with overwhelm. Looking beyond the behavior to the state of the system seems absolutely key.
Yeah, and building on that, the sources introduce two related concepts that help us understand this maybe on a deeper level. Qi and inner intelligence.
Qi, like life force energy flow? Is that the idea?
Yeah, basically, the natural energy flow through the body. And the idea is that physical or biochemical injuries, even old ones from childhood, like a bad fall or maybe exposure to toxins, can create blockages or disruptions in this flow.
Okay.
And when qi is blocked, it can manifest in subtle physical ways. Things like a persistent head tilt, or maybe one shoulder always being pulled inwards. It's described as the body trying to compensate or sort of grow around old injuries.
And this can impact things like sleep, behavior, function.
Exactly. Because it means the physical system isn't operating as smoothly as it should, and that inevitably impacts the nervous system and overall function. It's a very holistic view how physical experiences are tied to everything else.
Okay. And then there's inner intelligence. What does the source mean by that term?
This is described as an innate quality, something everyone is born with, but crucially something that needs to be nurtured and fostered. It's contrasted quite sharply with seeking external approval.
Yeah.
The material suggests we often focus too much on self-esteem, which can get tangled up with external validation, what others think, when the real goal should be cultivating self-worth, which comes from within.
So what does this inner intelligence actually look like in practice?
Well, it includes things like self-compassion, being kind to ourselves, even when we mess up, self-soothing, knowing how to manage discomfort or disappointment when things don't go our way. It's that internal capacity to process feelings and handle challenges from a place of inherent strength.
And the sources connect this to how kids develop coping strategies, often based on what worked to get their needs met in their original family, seeking that outer approval.
Yeah.
Sometimes described through frameworks like the Enneagram, right?
Yes, exactly. But the problem is, these strategies that worked in the family goldfish bowl often completely fall apart in the wider ocean of the world. And that leads to significant conflict, despair even. It's that clash between a strategy built on seeking external validation and an underdeveloped innate inner intelligence.
That really ties back to Dr. Duffy's daughter story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That idea she mentioned that sadness was cool or that others seemed sad, so it felt normal. That's such a powerful example of external influence just completely overriding that inner knowing that something feels wrong.
It really shows how easily external pressures can disconnect a child from their own truth, their own inner compass. It's quite scary, actually.
So, okay, how do we foster this crucial inner intelligence? How do we build real resilience in kids?
The parent's role is described as almost sacred in this, creating a safe holding container. Basically, an environment where a child feels secure enough to actually explore their difficult feelings without judgment, without fear.
So moving away from those often generational, unhelpful responses like, I'll give you something to cry about, or, children should be seen and not heard.
Exactly. The sources strongly advocate for responses like, what are you feeling right now? Simple, but powerful. Or, what's the need you're having? This shift teaches kids to identify their internal state and their needs, and it empowers them to communicate and negotiate for them.
And this is where the material takes a very, very strong look at the impact of social media.
Oh, yeah. It's highlighted as a major contributor to the rise in mental health issues we're seeing in kids. It creates these wildly unrealistic expectations, and it fosters this culture of bragging kids, constantly seeing others flexing their possessions, their perfect-looking lives.
Which then leads to kids feeling worthless if their own reality doesn't match those curated highlight reels they see online.
Yeah. Seeking that external validation through the lens of social media is described quite starkly as a very dangerous place.
And this point is really driven home by Abdullah's testimony in the sources. That's Dr. Saeed's son. He spoke so powerfully about deleting social media and realizing the huge negative impact it had, how it led him to seek a more mindful life.
Mm-hmm. He talked about learning that his self-worth isn't tied to those external things like money or success or just being cool.
He articulated how social media and peer pressure push kids into this desperate need to fit in, often sacrificing their own beliefs, their own ideas, just to belong.
And that sacrifice, he explained, leads directly to self-doubt. a profound lack of self-worth, feeling trapped, like in a prison, and utterly losing themselves. The sources directly connect this to the surge in depression and stress we're seeing.
The material also talks about that crucial developmental task of shifting the locus of control. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yes, this is really key, particularly for adolescents, teenagers. It's about moving from feeling that control or validation comes from external sources, parents, teachers telling them what to think, what to do, to finding that sense of control and value internally.
Right.
And social media constantly pulls them back towards that external validation model, which really hinders this vital internal shift. The sources mention an interesting example, something like a vision quest experience.
A vision quest?
Yeah, like a challenging trip involving maybe service, physical challenge, learning new things as one way some parents have helped facilitate this internal shift, moving away from external reliance.
Okay, so beyond understanding these underlying dynamics, what about practical tools? Approaches highlighted in the material for actually helping kids?
Well, therapy comes up as a really significant tool, a way for kids to safely empty out the bucket of stressors, process complex emotions, build coping skills.
Safe space.
Exactly. It can provide that crucial safe space, especially maybe for kids from less stable home environments, offering guidance, helping build resilience.
And hypnotherapy was specifically mentioned too as a tool for working with trauma.
Yes, the therapeutic kind, obviously not the stage show stuff. It's described as a way to revisit a traumatic memory, but in a safe, controlled environment. The goal isn't to re-traumatize, but to actually interrupt the response. Calm the conscious brain and install a new feeling of safety and control around that memory.
Interesting. The sources also listed a whole range of everyday lifestyle tools, things that can help build mental and physical resilience.
Yeah, quite a few. Things like establishing routines around gratitude and positivity, focusing on nourishing food, clean protein, healthy fats, avoiding processed junk. And there's a really strong emphasis on the significant gut-brain connection.
Right. If your gut's inflamed, your brain isn't going to be happy. Makes sense.
Totally. Hydration, obviously fundamental. Simple stress management techniques like mindfulness, even just humming or chanting, laughter, meditation, yoga, getting adequate sleep, that's non-negotiable. Teaching kids to really understand the benefit of sleep is key.
And detoxification support, was that mentioned?
Yes, things like Epsom salt baths, which apparently help boost glutathione and are calming. And key supplements like vitamin D, probiotics again for that gut connection, magnesium, omega-3s, those are all mentioned. And critically, surrounding kids with genuinely supportive people.
Which brings us to the powerful impact of role modeling. And this was illustrated so beautifully by Dr. Setty's personal story in the sources.
Oh, absolutely. She shared how she started motherhood facing her own chronic health issues, plus a traumatic incident involving her child at daycare. And this led her to this critical realization. She needed to heal herself first.
Right.
As she put it, how am I supposed to even take care of his child if she wasn't well herself? It's a profound question.
And her approach was fascinating. She brought her kids alongside her own learning and healing journey, like reading food labels together, things like that.
Exactly. She didn't just adopt these healing routines for herself in isolation. She educated her children about them, incorporated them into their shared family life. And that anecdote about her 5-year-old, it's amazing.
Yeah, reaching for sauerkraut because he felt agitated and thought his gut bugs were off after eating sugar.
A 5-year-old. Making a gut health choice based on how sugar made him feel. It just shows that kids, even really young ones, can learn and take ownership of incredibly complex health concepts when they're empowered with knowledge and given the tools.
And giving kids a sense of purpose through chores, contributing to the household that was highlighted as essential too, right? For building that inner sense of capability.
Definitely. And parents being a visible role model for self-care, not just endlessly scrolling their phones or collapsing in front of Netflix every night. Showing kids what healthy coping looks like.
The ultimate goal, as described, is like cultivating the child's brain, nurturing the soil of their well-being, providing them with knowledge and tools, and then trusting them to make their own choices, knowing you're there as a guide.
Yeah, Dr. Seid summarized it perfectly. I'm not micromanaging these things. I'm there. It's about empowerment, not control.
And she even mentions her kids' successes, like a book deal. Filming opportunities is flowing from incorporating these kinds of routines and principles into their lives.
It really reinforces that idea, doesn't it? That empowering kids with knowledge and a framework for well-being can lead to incredible outcomes.
So, okay, looking back at everything we've unpacked today, wow. We've covered that really expanded definition of trauma, including those silent, even in utero forms, and how it physically impacts the body and brain, sometimes creating that vicious cycle.
We've explored surprising potential causes, even common parenting practices maybe, and highlighted those crucial warning signs to watch for. We looked at how behavior is so rarely the problem itself, but more a symptom of that underlying nervous system state.
We dipped into those concepts of chi and inner intelligence versus the powerful pull of external validation, and specifically tackled the huge impact of social media.
Yeah. And we discussed practical ways to foster resilience, the parent's role as that safe container and role model, therapy, hypnotherapy, and that whole range of lifestyle tools, from gut health to sleep and stress management.
And the sources even gave us a little glimpse into where this whole exploration is headed next.
Right. They mentioned future parts of this series will take deeper dives into specific conditions, things like ADHD, autism, anxiety, depression, panspandas, exploring the links to trauma and biology.
And look ahead to breakthrough treatments, alternative therapies, natural solutions. Sounds fascinating.
And the very next specific topic they previewed is screen time, vision, and sleep, which sounds incredibly timely and probably packed with practical stuff.
Definitely. Look, this deep dive has really underscored just how profoundly trauma and overwhelming experiences can impact a child right from the very beginning, and how much external pressure they face, especially from the online world.
It really invites us, I think, to shift our focus, move away from just labeling behaviors and towards understanding the underlying needs, the nervous system states, and towards empowering kids with the tools to build their own inner strength, their own resilience.
So, given all of this, how deeply trauma can impact a child, how much external pressure they're under, and the real power of nurturing their inner world, here's maybe something to ponder. What small shift could you make today, starting now, to help nurture a child's innate inner intelligence?
And the people who shared all these insights, they mentioned they'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this in the comment section below.
Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.